Just as a little heads up before the video starts, I'm not claiming I believe absolutely everything that is said in these UFO and alien sightings, but it's just fun to talk about and share. I think you got to take all of this sort of stuff with a grain of salt, but to be honest, there are kernels of truth to be found in there, so if you open your mind to stuff like this, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff to be found. This is the first time I've ever tried to write this down, and the first time telling anyone outside the family. I'm leaving out time and location and some other details because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly, I guess. So, summer before 8th grade, me and two of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighbourhood and go see these girls on the next block who were having a sleepover. We turn a corner in our neighbourhood and there's this huge black blimp-shaped thing in the sky. Like the pictures of the Hindenburg, but bigger than that, and as close, if not closer. Completely silent, and the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across. No exaggeration, even though I was young. We stare at it entranced, asking each other over and over again if we see it, which we all agree that we do, standing there, frozen in one place. It's like black polished gunmetal. No lights, no sound, no anything. It's just hovering there. And then I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumps. Next thing I remember is the craft, or ship, government experiment, whatever the hell it is gone. And there's a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to earth with wisps of smoke coming off it. Then 2 brand new black trucks with silver gearboxes on the back, like F-150s or S-10s, but nicer, came speeding down the street, going about 70 in a residential 25 miles per hour neighbourhood. Then after that I remember walking home to one of my friends' houses and going to bed. At that point it was like 5 or 6 AM and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning, because he worked for the city but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my friends who was there, but the other was my best friend and we sort of made an unspoken pact never to talk about it again. Don't know how or why we did that though. We all grew up and I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect over Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us neither of us wanted to touch or talk about. Looking back on it now, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. That there were others and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia, accepting how we're not. I've thought about hypnosis, but that scares me too. Plus, I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then, and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there's no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. We're talking a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses, just after midnight on a summer weekend night. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV, and no words spoken about it again, ever, by anyone. This is a true story though. I'm a little older than the average around here I think, but I know what creepypasta and stuff like that is. This happened. And there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. No way. Thanks for letting me get that off my chest. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know for sure. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 PM. At exactly 10:53 I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I noticed what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, Great, I'm getting pulled over. So I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared, and no car drove past. Now, here is where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I'm sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up, because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up and down, while the dome light and headlights started to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 PM. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a better look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I began to freak out. Where am I? Why the fuck am I asleep in the middle of a field? And where the fuck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350N and 50W. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 AM. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield, which was more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I've only ever shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I'm sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy, or they would call bullshit on the whole story. And I can't blame them. If somebody came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. I was travelling back home with my mum from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road a few seconds, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes, disintegrates, disappears, whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mum and I could tell by her expressions she had seen the same thing. Ever since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, aeroplane, or a flock of geese. My mum and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it's not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. My mum tells of a story of her and a friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mum and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours had passed. Mum doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mum with things like, "I don't know," and "just drop it," for a very long time. So a couple months later, Mum moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets up with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. She appears very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanour, like she was really happy and at peace for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mum says she still doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more and more. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, they paralysed her somehow and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently they told her all sorts of things. Stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would also be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They told her that it was not their fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They also told her that they had abducted my mother, another time after that first incident. Mum says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mum that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mum inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says that you will know eventually. And she says that once she learned of the truth, that everything became wonderful. Mum has seen her a few more times over the years. We still live in another state from her. And she apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. TLDR, aliens abduct my mum and her friend. Mum doesn't remember much, but her friend remembers everything. Apparently they were both abducted again several times after that. Aliens predict the future. Not a very spectacular story here, but it's true. I've always felt some encounter stories were real, but what made me truly believe was one night standing outside watching the stars. It was late, maybe 2 AM, and out in the country so it was dark, no streetlights and very little to no moon. I was watching what I thought was a satellite moving across the sky from right to left. I didn't think twice about it, as I saw them all the time. Suddenly though, the satellite stopped and shot off fast, totally disappeared, at a 45-degree angle from the direction it came from. I've never ever seen a satellite change direction, ever. It startled me so much I stood there for a bit wondering if I really saw it or not. But I did, 100% certain. It's just unfortunate that no one was there with me that night.